Today we're continuing in our series Passion Parables, and we're looking at stories that Jesus told that points to his death and his resurrection. Well, today we're in Luke chapter 15, beginning at verse 11, which is probably the most famous story of all that Jesus told. Let's read together. And he said, "There was a man who had 2 sons. And the younger of them said to his father, 'Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me.' And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the young son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country, and there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he'd spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, but no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread? But I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fattened calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fattened calf, because he's received him back safe and sound.' But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him. But he answered his father, 'Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fattened calf for him.' And he said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found.'" Let me begin with asking you this question. What is your favorite TV show? And if you're worshiping alongside someone today, watching this, turn to them, share what is your favorite TV show. For me, it's The Repair Shop. The Repair Shop is a reality show that's filmed in a barn in England, and this barn is called The Repair Shop. And in the show, people dropped off damaged and broken items to the repair shop, where these incredibly skilled heritage craftsmen restore them and bring them back to life. Somebody will bring in a vase that has been shattered into 50 pieces, or furniture that's damaged and broken, or paintings that have large tears in them. And for me, it's fascinating to watch these craftsmen with these extraordinary skills fix everything. It's just amazing what they are able to do. So that's kind of one part of the show. And the other part of the show that's just as compelling, if not more, is the stories behind the items that people bring in. Most of the items do not have any great monetary value, although some do. But for everyone who comes in, these items are absolutely priceless because of the deep personal attachment, kind of the history that is part of that item. So, for example, there was a episode where someone brought in a violin that had been part of their family and had been in the concentration camp in World War II and had been hidden and then passed along through the generations. There was a woman who was, I believe, in her 90s, and she brought in a teddy bear to get repaired. And it was the teddy bear that she had clung to during the London Blitz, the bombings, back in the early stages of World War II. And she had had it her whole life and then given it to her son, and it had been meaningful to him. And then he passed away, and it came back to her, and she was just looking for this, doll that had been absolutely destroyed to be fixed. Perhaps I think the saddest one for me was a story about a guy who had bought a pogo stick for his mother when he was 9 years old. He had heard when he was a kid that his mother, she told him this story about being on a pogo stick and how much fun she had when she was a little girl. So he bought a pogo stick as he was walking by a garage sale. He saw one and he went to bring it home to his mother. He was 9 years old. When he got home, he found out that his mother had passed away from an aneurysm very unexpectedly, and he'd never been able to give her this pogo stick. And now it was, rusted and kind of, almost beyond recognition as a pogo stick. So, just these really touching, heartfelt, heart-wrenching stories. So at the end of the episode, the owners return to the repair shop to pick up the items. And it's always a very, very emotional response and tears of joy of seeing what was once ruined, what was once considered beyond hope, now restored and brought back to life. And to be honest, there are times when I get choked up too, watching the people get their items back. Well, in the Bible verses we're looking at today, Jesus told a parable that has the same theme of loss of something priceless, its restoration to life, and the overwhelming joy it brings. So Jesus kind of tells sort of a repair shop type of a story. Now, a word about parables. Parables are stories that communicate a great spiritual truth. So whenever we hear about a parable or we hear that word, we know that there's going to be a deeper meaning hidden within the story. We don't just take the story at face value. There's something deeper. So let's dig into this parable and find out what great spiritual truth Jesus was trying to communicate with his audience and to us. Well, the parable begins with a father and two sons. And the younger son makes a very strange and offensive request to his father. In verse 12, it says, "Give me the share of the property that is coming to me." Now, in Israel, where this story takes place, land was everything. It was part of your inheritance that you got in the promised land. You owned part of the promised land. It was yours. And it was a legacy that was passed down from generation to generation. It identified you as part of God's people, as part of God's blessing given to you. Well, more than that, it was also where you lived and how you earned a living, because the land was farmed. So it had a very practical aspect. Now, the son, being that he was a younger son, according to the laws in those days, when his father passed away, he would have been entitled to 1/3 of the property. But he doesn't want to wait for it. So he makes this request, "I want it now." It's as if he was saying, "I wish you were dead so I could get at it." Now, the audience who was listening to the story, their expectation is that the son's obnoxious request would be rejected. He'd be thrown out of the house and out of the village. He'd be just cut off completely. And that would have been the norm. That would have been what they would have done. And yet, Jesus' parable starts off with a twist kind of here right off the bat, because the father, for his own reasons, grants this request. And he gives the son the deed to a third of his land. So we pick up the story then in verse 12. It says, "Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey to a far country." That's kind of a loaded verse there. It says, "Not many days later." So this son, he is eager to get out. And it says he took all he had. So he's leaving nothing behind. There's a sense of like there's no plans of ever coming back. And he goes to a far country. So he's not just, moving to the next town. He's getting away as far as he can, as fast as he can. His motto may have been like anywhere but here. And it's strange, though, that he would have that feeling, because as we read through the parable, the father is depicted as being very kind and generous and loving. But this younger son, he's so driven by self, he cannot see it, he cannot appreciate it. Well, I don't know about you, but I can relate somewhat to the younger son. I remember being in my late teens and really getting the urge to want to be out on my own. I didn't really want to live anymore by the house rules of, whether it was a curfew or having to make a bed or empty a dishwasher or cut the lawn. Like, I kind of want to just be out and I wanted to do my own thing, my own way, at my own time. Let's get back to this thought, though. This is a parable. This is a parable. And Jesus isn't just telling a story about a rebellious young man who's coming of age. He's taking us into something much deeper here. And what Jesus is giving us here is a picture of all of humanity and our relationship to God. That's what this story is really about. It's a picture of humanity and its relationship to God. And in this parable, we are all, each of us, we are represented by the younger son, and God is the Father. We can go in the Bible all the way back to the beginning with Adam and Eve and see that humanity has always wanted to do its own thing apart from God, and even to distance itself from God. And that's what we call sin. And kind of have it on your screen. It's lowercase s, capital I, lowercase n. And we can call this the big I problem. That's what sin is. It's the big I problem. When we also think of sin, we'll think of it as like just these really wicked moral acts. And it can be. That is sin. But sin is ultimately rooted in self. It's I. It's me at the center. Me first. And so like the younger son in the story, we don't really want God in our lives, at least all the time. We don't want his control. We don't want his authority. We don't want his morals or his rules or his commands. And there's a thought that there is more to life outside of God than can be found in him or living with him. And so we walk away and do things our way. And this is all of us. Scripture says we all, like sheep, have gone astray. And this rebellion is strange because just like the father in the story, God is good and loving and kind and generous. So the younger son goes away. He's off in the far country and things start off great. He's having the time of his life. He's getting everything he wanted. But the good life didn't last very long. It says he squandered his property. He was selling it away, the value of it, bit by bit, until this claim on his family's land that had been passed down for, 1,000+ years, it's gone. The family has lost the land because he's sold it all, and then with the proceeds, he's wasted it. And he's wasted it, says, on reckless living, which means very lavish, very extravagant. And actually, that's where we get the word prodigal. Prodigal doesn't mean somebody who goes away. It means very lavish, very extravagant, very reckless. And so he spent everything. There's nothing left. It's all gone, and he's got nothing to show for it. And then things get really bad. In verse 14, it says, then severe famine hit the land, and he began to be in need. So he's no money, no food, no resources, no place to live. And he's all on his own. So he does the only thing he can do at that point in his mind. He hires himself out. He's going to work for a citizen in that far country. And the job he gets is to feed pigs. And that's just the lowest of the low, not just because that sounds like a terrible job, but for Jews, pigs were unclean. To work with them would be very defiling. And it was just the worst job you could imagine. But not only is kind of like the work conditions awful, but he is so hungry that the food they're giving the pigs begins to look appetizing. Now, if you've ever seen a pig eat, they basically eat garbage and scraps, and it's kind of, thrown in, into the pen. So he's looking at basically garbage in mud, and he's like, man, that looks so good. Now, I don't know how hungry you have to get for garbage in mud to look good, but you got to be super, super hungry. But even then, it says no one would help him. No one would even set aside a little bit of the, scraps and garbage for him. They wouldn't even do that. When I think of this young guy's life, I think of those items that are brought into the repair shop. His life is just like that. It's in a broken and shattered condition. You kind of feel like it's beyond all help. And there's a few times people will bring things in a box that's so broken that the repairmen have to ask, what is it? What am I even supposed to do with it? It's beyond recognition. And that's where this young man is. And then the story twists. Beginning in verse 17, it says, for the first time since the story began, he gets a moment of clarity. It says he came to himself. So he gets a moment of clarity. Notice first about his father. He goes, my father's servants have more than enough bread. It's that first admission that his father is good and generous. And then he's got a moment of clarity about himself. He goes, here I am. I'm perishing with hunger. So he's talking physically. He's suffering. He's wasting away with the realization that if this continues, I'm going to die. So in the parable, the young son devises a 3-part plan. Part 1, go home. Verse 18, he says, I will arise and go to my father. So he's kind of, imagine him laying on his back in the mud with the pigs. He goes, I'm going to get up and I'm going to go home. Number 2, he said, I'm going to acknowledge my mistake. Verse 19, it says, I am no longer worthy to be called your son. He said, I've lost my standing. I acknowledge it. I forfeit it when I wished you were dead. From then on, I have not been your son. And 3, he's going to make an offer of restitution. In verse 19, it says, treat me as one of your hired servants. Let me tell you what he's thinking. He says, if you let me back in, I'll repay you. That's his plan. He wants to repay his dad. I'll work as a servant, and I'll earn my way back, and I will try to do whatever I can to, restore this land, which is never going to happen, but that's his plan. So let's shift back to our life and how it fits into this parable. I think we come to a time in life when we recognize a fact, just like this man did, when you get that moment of clarity when it's like, my life isn't working. I don't know if you've ever had a home project or, just working on something, and just the way you're going about it, you just come to this realization, it's not working. I'm not going to fix this. This is just broken. And the way I'm trying to resolve it is it's futile. It's not going to work. And it's not just something we encounter once in a while kind of with a home repair, but with our life. And this recognition that our life isn't working is brought about by, I think, one of 2 things. The first is disappointment. Disappointment that my life is not what I thought it was going to be. And the things that I thought would make me happy and fulfilled and at peace or give meaning. They have failed to do that. I mean, it's imagine like spending years searching for a buried treasure, only to finally find it and discover that when you open it up, it's empty. But knowing that it's cost you everything to find it. That's what the experience of life is like apart from the Lord. It's just interesting. A couple celebrities have kind of commented on this. One is Eminem. If you would know who he is, he's actually from Michigan. He's a rapper. He's been in a movie. He's a music producer, kind of celebrity guy. And he said this about his career. He says, "I always wished for this, but it's almost turning into more of a nightmare than a dream." And Jim Carrey, who's a famous actor, said this, "I think everyone should get rich and famous and do everything they ever dreamed of so they can see it's not the answer." And I just wonder if you can hear just like the disappointment in their words. Whatever it is that we think is going to, be the thing that makes us happy, whether it's fame, success, money, academic achievement, physical pleasure, partying, success, status, whatever it is. All of those things have one thing in common. They all overpromise and underdeliver. And so, like the sun, I think we find out life in the far country isn't as great as we hoped and thought it would be. But the other thing that we see here is pain, right? I mean, he's perishing, he's suffering, he's dying, and his life hurts, and we get that. I mean, what are the things that really wake us up in life? It's pain. It's when we go through something like a divorce or a very difficult medical diagnosis, or if we're going through some kind of physical suffering or unrealized hopes and the reality that it's never going to happen for us, and it's pain, and it just comes down on us. And those are the kind of things that make us realize that, like, kind of, my way isn't working. And I want to share this for those maybe who are not connected to First Reformed Church. And do you know why we're here, why we're part of this church? It's because we have all encountered disappointment and pain at some point in our lives, and have come to the conclusion that only God, through Jesus Christ, can meet our deepest needs. That's it. That's why we're here. It's not because we're holier than thou and we think we're better than everyone. No, we've just encountered disappointment to a level and come to the conclusion that only God, through Jesus Christ, can meet our desperate needs. So, in the story, verse 20, it says, he arose and he came to his father. He's coming home. He's coming home to dad. And finally, moment of truth, right? What kind of reception is he going to receive? I mean, he's disgraced his father. He's squandered what's been given to him. And by his older brother's admission at the end of the passage, everybody knew the lewd and disgusting things he'd spent his money on. And so we picture him coming up that familiar dusty road just outside his village, desperately hoping for some small piece of love to still remain in his father's once generous heart. Or that there would just be a crack in the door, that he could try to work his way back into the life he lost. So what happens? Verse 20. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced and kissed him. Compassion. That is what he met. He was met with compassion, not contempt. Not the contempt he feared, but with compassion. Father had this deep gut response. He's powerfully moved by the sight of his son who is wasting away and covered in filth. And there's more than just a piece of love left in his heart. The son still had all of his father's heart. And he didn't just have a crack in the door. The Father had kicked down the door to welcome him home. And I want you to know this is how God feels towards us. Compassion. This is God's heart and his feeling towards us. And that's not to say not that the consequences of choices we make are not real, and not that God is happy with all the choices we make. He's not, just like the father in the story. But he sees our misery, our hurt, and our pain, and it moves him. It moves him to compassion. And this is the God in whose universe you live. Know that this is the God in whose universe you live, a God of compassion. When he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion and ran and embraced him and kissed him. Let me see. Think about this. How do you imagine this scene playing out in your head when the father first sees the son? And maybe you imagine the father's kind of sitting on the porch of the farmhouse, and out in the distance he sees the son coming up the lane, and the dad gets up and he runs out to meet him, and kind of there's this wonderful embrace. And that's nice, but that would be a very modern idea. That's not how at all the story would have been heard by those who were listening to it in the first century. When they heard the story, they would have been thinking about Kazah. Kazah. Say, what in the world is that? Well, Kazah was a ceremony. It was a process that people had to go through who had left the community, or they had severely disgraced the community. And when you had done that, you would then have to meet with the council of village elders to be readmitted into the village, into the community. Now, what's interesting with a Kazah, that family members like his father would not have allowed to be part of it, because obviously they would be very biased. And here's the thing. Once they know what you had done and you explained yourself, if the council of elders rejected it, they rejected you, they would take a clay pot and they would smash it on the ground. And that was a symbol that you were excommunicated. You were dead to them. You were sent away forever. And that's just what the listening audience would have expected. You know, what's interesting here is that a very similar story to the parable we're reading existed when Jesus told it. And it's a story about a younger son who goes away, realizes the mistakes he's made, and when he gets home, and the crowd who's listening to Jesus is thinking, yep, we've heard the story. He comes home and he gets rejected. He receives Kazah. He's kicked out. And this parable is a tale of warning, not to, run away and mess up and, do bad things. But in Jesus' parable, the father ran to the son. And he ran to the son before the Kazah could take place to spare him from the judgment. Now it's interesting. Men didn't run in that culture, especially respectable men. And it was because to show any part of your legs was a social taboo. And if you were running in the clothes of that day, the men would have had to hike up, whatever they were wearing, tuck it in their belt. And so he's running in a very shameful way to save his son. To save his son from judgment, he's going to bring the shame upon himself. And when you have that picture in mind, does that not lead us to the picture of Jesus on the cross? You and I, we deserve Kazah for what we have done. We have walked away from God. We have violated his commands. We have sinned. We have rejected him, and we have squandered so much of the life he has given to us. But here we have Jesus subjecting himself to the shame of the cross. And Jesus not just bearing his legs, he was crucified naked, bearing his entire body to the shame and the humiliation of the cross. And he takes his place. He takes our place so that his beloved might be spared from judgment and eternal separation. And This is the truth. This Jesus coming, running to us, enduring shame to keep us from judgment. That is what lies at the heart of our faith. And that is why the cross is our symbol, because it is the story of what God has done for us. Well, the young man, when he sees his father, he starts to lay out the plan to earn his way back. But his father cuts him off. He goes, bring out the robe, bring out the ring, bring out the shoes. And now those items may not mean much to us, but they had special meaning back in the day. A robe was a sign of dignity and honor and respectability. And the father says, bring out the best one, which was what? It was his. It was his. Bring out my robe, bring out my best one, and put it on him. And a ring was a sign of family authority and trust, like in the days of signet rings. And it was like only family members had that. And also, he was given shoes. And in that culture, servants didn't wear shoes. Only family members could wear shoes. And so each of these objects demonstrates that the father has rejected the son's offer of servanthood. But instead, he has fully restored him now as son. He has restored him fully and completely in the robe, the ring, and the shoes. Now, what we need to learn from this is that we cannot earn our way back. It's just not possible. Nor does God want us to try, because the Lord has absorbed the cost of our sin on the cross. And so just as the Son was received in grace, our Father in heaven receives us in grace. And just like the Son was clothed in the Father's robe, which covered up his filth and his shame, the Bible says that we are clothed in the righteousness of Jesus Christ, and our sin is no longer apparent. It has been covered up by his sin. And we're brought into God's family, his forever family. We're saved into that. And twice in the story, the father says, my son, he's gone from death to life. And that's what this is about. It's God restoring our life. He gives us life, his life, his eternal life, which begins now. It doesn't begin when you die. It's life with God now. And it does extend into eternity. It's why we're celebrating Easter today. Because Jesus rose from the dead. And through him we can have eternal life too. And so the parable ends with a celebration. A great feast. You know, the father didn't get his land back, but he got back what he really wanted, his son. And that was cause for great joy. And you need to know that God feels the same about you. You're what he really wants. Your heart, your desire to live with him and be with him and to be part of his forever family, that's what he wants. And I think that is the great spiritual truth Jesus is trying to communicate in this parable. That God's love and saving grace extends further and deeper than you could ever imagine. Let that sink in. You know, the crowd there, they really needed to hear that message because Jesus was talking to a bunch of strict religious legalists who had a very different idea of what God would be like. That God was the God of Kazaa who would smash, that God would treat those who lived their lives away from him with contempt. And this idea of this is who God is, it's very much alive today. And you can't come back. You can't go home. And maybe that's something you have thought or still have in the back of your mind. But is not Jesus' parable a clear declaration from heaven that no sin is too wicked, no country too far, no recklessness too severe, no shame too great, no corruption too far gone, and no pigsty too filthy for God's love and grace to overcome, to restore, and to bring back to life? So on this Easter, I invite you to come home, to come to Christ on the cross, and to the empty tomb. For those are nothing less than God's own repair shop for your soul, and how he rejoices and celebrates over the work that he can and will do in your life.